Hey everyone, it's Wes Ulbrich, Secretary of the Greater Hartford Twilight Baseball League, otherwise known as GHTBL. I'm presenting another video to you today about a little-known story out of New Britain, Connecticut, where 4 Cuban players came to America and became big stars in baseball in New England. So here's their story. Hope you enjoy. Cuban stars of the New Britain Perfectos. Decades prior to the New Britain Red Sox, Rockcats, or Bees, Connecticut's Hardware City had another minor league team. From 1908 to 1911, the New Britain Perfectos were a Level B club in the Connecticut State League. The Perfectos acquired their nickname after the arrival of 4 Cuban players: Armando Marsans, Rafael Almeida, Alfredo Cabrera, and Luis Padrón. They were the first Cubans to become stars during baseball's dead ball era. This Cuban-American tale traces back to when team nicknames were assigned by fans and sports writers. The team's official name was the New Britain Baseball Club, yet its many nicknames were subject to change. Before being dubbed the Perfectos, New Britain went by the Mountaineers because their ballpark, Electric Field, backed up into a rugged hillside. When the Cubans came to the affluent city of New Britain in 1908, the team's new moniker reflected a general sense of culture shock. The name Perfectos was a backhanded compliment directed at the Cuban players. The term alluded to the Spanish word for perfect and described the superb abilities of Marsans, Almeida, Cabrera, and Padrón. However, a Perfecto was also a type of Cuban cigar which referenced their appearance. Multiple Hartford Current articles called the Cubans smoke players to cite their skin color and fast play. In the face of racial prejudice, the 4 Cubans would prevail to varying degrees of success. Before coming to New Britain, the men were among baseball's first Latino prospects. They were from well-off families and played baseball for sport. Alfredo Cabrera, known as Cabbage or Cabby, was allegedly the nephew of President Manuel Estrada Cabrera of Guatemala. Almeida was said to be Portuguese royalty. Armando Marsans was the son of a Havanan merchant who grew wealthy during the Spanish-American War and the occupation of Cuba. In 1906, the men toured the United States with the baseball stars of Cuba, playing 122 games and winning 84 of them. In 1907, Marsans and company were rumored to be headed for Scranton of the New York State League, but the move never materialized. Instead, they remained fixtures on the Almendares and Habana clubs of the Cuban Winter League. Meanwhile, in New Britain, club owner Charles Humphrey vowed to assemble a contender for the 1908 season. Knowing of their exploits, Humphrey traveled to Havana and successfully recruited the 4 Cuban players. The men arrived to Connecticut via steamship and resided at Hotel Boulogne, 91 Church Street, New Britain. Marsans, Almeida, Cabrera, and Padrón were immediately polarizing figures. While some fans compared them to heroes like D'Artagnan in the Three Musketeers, others spurned the Cubans for disrupting white baseball. Non-whites were informally barred from participating in the Connecticut State League, but owner Humphrey maintained that they were descendants of Spaniards. A columnist ironically noted that Perfecto's catcher, Nick Ruffiange, had darker skin than his Cuban teammates, other than Padrón, who was reportedly half African. Despite objections from some players, managers, and fans, the Cuban players were allowed to participate. They proceeded to solve the Connecticut State League. Padrón hit .314, ranking 3rd in the league. He excelled as a two-way player, winning 18 games as a pitcher while hitting 7 home runs in the batter's box. Almeida smashed a .291 average with 5 home runs. Marsans batted .274 while swiping 33 stolen bases. Midway through the 1908 season, Charles Humphrey sold the New Britain Baseball Club, citing financial issues. Even though the Perfectos drew 500 to 2,000 spectators at each home game, ownership transferred to William W. Hanna, a stone magnate and owner of the city's roller polo team, an early form of ice hockey. The club took on new nicknames when Hanna bought the team, including Bank Wreckers, Clam Bakers, Hannaites, and Hanna's Moro Castle Knights, referencing a historic fortress in Havana. A former pitcher from New London, Albert L. Page, was appointed as manager and oversaw a fourth-place finish in the standings. Upon purchasing the New Britain club, Billy Hanna faced ongoing criticism for using non-white players. Manager Dan O'Neill of the Springfield Ponies took special issue with Louis Padrón, who happened to be a top performer in the State League. Because Padrón had darker complexion than his peers, O'Neill demanded proof of his Spanish heritage. However, president of the league, James O'Rourke, declined to ban the players on the basis of race. O'Rourke was approached by a New Britain Herald reporter who published the following account on the Padrón affair. Officials say Padrón's color was never a subject of talk at league meetings, and they claim there is nothing to indicate that there will be a discussion of the point. Opposition to the Cuban Stars forced owner Hanna to lead a fact-finding mission abroad. In December of 1908, Hanna sailed from New York to Havana around the same time that Frank Bancroft's Cincinnati Reds were touring the island. Hanna made several visits to Almendares Park, home to many of Cuba's best ball players. Presumably, Hanna investigated the lineage of his players because he decided to release Louis Padrón from New Britain. Padrón was dismissed despite being a fan favorite in his first year with the Perfectos. He learned of his release in a handwritten letter from Hanna. Later, Padrón was rumored to have been scouted by Charles Comiskey's Chicago White Sox. He played several years in different minor leagues from Connecticut to California. Padrón would also make a comeback to New Britain at a later date. The following spring, Marsans, Cabrera, and Almeida returned to New Britain for the 1909 season. In May, Marsans was stricken by a respiratory illness that landed him in New Britain Hospital. After a subpar experience at the hospital and fearing tuberculosis, Marsans returned to Cuba. Cabrera and Almeida continued on as everyday players. Almeida raked 10 home runs with a .308 batting average. As New Britain finished in third place in 1909, owner Hanna was again pestered by state leaguers calling for the removal of non-white players. According to the Hartford Current, many opposing players did not want brown players to participate. Instead of caving to pressure this time, Hanna went to great lengths to legitimize his team. He hired as manager a former umpire turned president of the National League, Thomas J. Lynch. The Perfectos were fond of Lynch, though he would only manage for part of the season. The Perfectos endured abusive slurs made by players and fans, especially from their rivals, the Hartford Senators. These insults may have revealed a jealous streak among state leaguers, since Marsans, Cabrera, and Almeida were top performers. They were said to have acted like gentlemen by not seeking revenge. Only once did the trio retaliate publicly as a form of protest. Around Christmas of 1909, the three men led a strike and refused to play in a Cuban Winter League game because their opponents had 3 American players. Nevertheless, the protest controversy subsided, and Marsans, Almeida, and Cabrera rejoined New Britain in 1910. Owner Hanna hired Joe Connor as Perfecto's player-manager, a big leaguer from Waterbury and younger brother to home run king Roger Connor. The team slumped from April to May. Then, in a surprising twist, Billy Hanna sold the New Britain franchise to manager Dan O'Neill for $3,500 on a few words and a handshake. It was claimed to be the fastest deal ever made in the Connecticut State League. Upon purchasing the Perfectos, O'Neill was quoted saying, "If the team as it stands at present does not suit, why I will go out and hunt up some players who will." Baseball aficionados speculated that New Britain would sell off its players. Instead, O'Neill established a board of strategy headed by Charles Pop Irving and local hotelier Fred Boulogne. New Britain's existing roster thrived under O'Neill in 1910. The Perfectos set a scoreless streak of 33 innings, and Marsans compiled a .304 batting average in 111 games. Fans anticipated a pennant bid, but New Britain ultimately finished third. That offseason, Marsans, Almeida, and Cabrera made their regular appearances for the Almendares club in Havana. They were among few professionals who played year-round. The average ballplayer thinks he has done enough diamond work when he puts in a couple of months at training, and then plays 5 or 6 months during the summer. There are 3 Cuban players who engage in the grand old game of baseball practically the entire year. The players in question are Cabrera, Marsans, and Almeida, all members of the New Britain team of the Connecticut League during the summer months. Just as soon as they returned to Havana at the close of the American season, they joined the Almendares, playing first against the major league teams that annually invade the island, and then later in the Cuban League, which starts immediately on the departure of the big leaguers for the States. The trio are all clever infielders and play a fast article of ball. New York Times, December 18, 1910. In November of 1910, the Isle of Cuba welcomed the apex of major league clubs to Havana. A series of matchups were organized by Cuban officials and American baseball statesman Frank Bancroft. The Almendares club, boasting Marsans, Almeida, and Cabrera, pulled off an unbelievable defeat of the Philadelphia Athletics, World Series champions. Then, Almendares faced Ty Cobb and the Detroit Tigers, runner-ups of the American League. Of any American teams to visit Cuba, only the Tigers had beaten Almendares thus far, winning the series 7-12. As worthy opponents of the Tigers and Athletics, demand for Cuban players reached a fever pitch. Before the next season, owner O'Neill persuaded Cabrera to take a pay raise. When Marsans and Almeida held out for higher salaries, O'Neill turned to his bilingual associate, Billy Hanna, for assistance. A frequent visitor to Cuba, Hanna boarded a ship to iron out new contracts with Marsans and Almeida. Armando Marsans and Rafael Almeida signed with New Britain, but were mostly absent for the 1911 campaign. Almeida never appeared for the club that season. When Marsans was present, he tussled with O'Neill. Marsans quit the team in mid-May after advising O'Neill to change pitchers in a game against Hartford. Some accounts blamed Marsans for disappearing when he lost a $50 bet on the Hartford game. Others held O'Neill responsible for scolding Marsans over his base running. O'Neill's chocolate soldiers were identified as deserters who wilted in the heat of battle. Local columnists slammed the 2 dusky ball tossers and recommended suspensions. Some journalists claimed that Marsans and Almeida were playing amateur ball in Brooklyn. Alfredo Cabrera was distressed and feeling abandoned by his friends. When Marsans departed, he wrote a short letter to Dan O'Neill stating that his mother was sick and he was obliged to return home. The absence of Marsans and Almeida from New Britain precipitated a historic transaction. In June of 1911, Dan O'Neill sold Marsans and Almeida to the Cincinnati Reds, becoming the first Cubans in the National League. O'Neill profited handsomely. He received $2,000 upon agreeing to sell their contracts. O'Neill collected an additional $2,500 from Cincinnati when the transaction was closed. As part of the deal, O'Neill liquidated his shares in the team. He sold the New Britain franchise for an additional $2,300 to the next owner, James J. Murphy. Marsans and Almeida debuted for Cincinnati at Chicago's West Side grounds on July 4, 1911. The 23-year-old Marsans batted .317 and stole 35 bases in his second season with the Reds. He was sometimes called Cuba's answer to Ty Cobb. Marsans played 8 seasons in the major leagues, earning a reputation as one of the game's fastest outfielders. While in the big leagues, Marsans operated a cigar store and managed a tobacco farm in Cuba. Rafael Almeida played 3 partial seasons in Cincinnati. His best year was in 1911, when he swatted a .311 batting average in 115 at-bats, while amassing an .890 fielding percentage at third base. At the time, Almeida was considered the strongest hitter ever produced from Cuba. His final stop in American baseball was for Scranton in the New York State League. Almeida's professional career spanned more than 20 years, and finally ended with Havana of the Cuban Winter League. As for Alfredo Cabrera, the reliable shortstop had 407 base hits in 416 total games with New Britain. Following stints for Waterbury and Springfield in 1913, he suited up for a single big league game with the St. Louis Cardinals. Cabrera remained in the minor leagues and the Cuban Winter League for the rest of his career. He led Almendares to a pennant as player-manager in 1915. Cabrera's latter years were spent as groundskeeper of Havana's El Gran Stadium until retiring in the 1950s. In August of 1911, Luis Mullo Padrón was invited back to New Britain. Ownership had received letters from fans requesting to sign Padrón. The remarkable Cuban was with the Mansfield Club of the Ohio-Pennsylvania League, and threw a no-hitter in a Sunday League game in Brooklyn. His second stint with New Britain lasted just 12 days, but he was a professional ball player in white, black, and Cuban baseball for nearly 20 years. Padrón wielded great power at any position, and some accounts attested that he hit the longest ever home run at New Britain's Electric Field. When the Connecticut State League collapsed in 1913, the New Britain franchise dwindled away. The team will forever be remembered as a stepping stone for Cuban players on their way to the National League. By 1915, Marsans, Almeida, Cabrera, and Padrón were back in Cuba for good. They were national heroes, pillars of Cuban baseball, and eventual inductees into the Cuban Baseball Hall of Fame.